right. So this unit is covers a few different topics. So the title is Living Things. What we're going to do is start by talking about what are the characteristics that all living things share. And then we'll talk a little bit about evolution and natural selection, which tells us how living things have come to be the way that they are today. And from there, we'll move into talking about cells and some more details. So that's sort of where we're going over the next few weeks. Anyone know who this guy is?
Charles Darwin.
Not Santa.
Charles Darwin.
Charles Darwin.
How do you know
All right, so let me, I'm going to skip that. Too easy. All right, so living things. You guys came up with a few of the characteristics that we're going to talk about that are common to all living things. There's some that you did not mention. So first of all, the one you guys came up with first. Yes, all living things are made of cells. From the very simplest living things to the most complex, they are all made of cells. What would you say? Raise your hand if you could tell me, what is the simplest thing that's still actually alive? Alice? Okay, let's be a little bit more specific. There are some organisms that are a living thing, but they're just a single cell. Us, on the other hand, we're trillions of cells. So there are many single cell organisms. We could be even more specific. Diksha?
Isn't it something that starts with an A?
No. No? Sean?
Germs.
What does that word mean? So that word can mean a couple things, but you're getting very close. Bacteria. Bacteria are very simple cells. They're very small. The actual...
I couldn't find it.
All right.
But I did find gummy bears.
Oh.
I took a couple.
Addis, we'll get you one here
Second floor,
eventually.
alright?
Thank you. So, they're all made of one or more cells. And bacteria have almost nothing in them. They're cytoplasm. They have a nuclear material, some ribosomes, and a cell membrane. A very simple package. We'll get more into that as we talk about cells. All living things use energy. So in order to stay alive, in order to maintain all of their bodily processes, they need to use energy. Without a source of energy, living things cannot stay alive. They grow over time and develop, sometimes changing in form. They maintain homeostasis, balance, keeping the proper conditions. They all have the same universal genetic code. We'll talk about each of these in more detail. They all are capable of reproduction. And finally, they are all adapted to their environment. So these are what we call the 7 characteristics of living things. We're going to talk about each of these characteristics in a little bit more detail. Starting with cells. So all living things are made of cells. So we could say that sort of cells are the building blocks of living things, the basic unit. As I said, us, a human, is made of trillions of cells, kind of working together to make who we are. But there are simple living things that are a single cell. Cells are generally small, they're microscopic. Can't see them with the naked eye. And this is an example. So this is showing you the skin of an onion. Each individual sort of, it looks kind of like bricks.
Yeah.
Individual
I thought
bricks.
it was like human, like, or like
Yeah, all
elephant
those human
skin.
skin.
No,
Yeah.
that's a single cell. Each of those little bricks that make up that pattern is one cell.
Why does it have a picture of an onion?
I'm going blind, looking at the picture of the sun and the sunflower.
So, all living things are made of cells. All living things need energy. And there are two categories of living things in terms of energy. And you guys started to mention this as we were going over our question. Have you heard these two words?
Yes.
I've heard the second one. I've heard one.
So the root troph, some people say troph, means having to do with food. Auto means what? Yeah, so auto means self. So this sort of means self-feeding. So autotrophs are organisms which don't have to go out and find food. They can make their own food, if you want to call it that, from the sun. So autotrophs are what?
Plants.
Plants and some other organisms as well.
Like planktons?
Yep. Algae,
Yeah.
plankton, plants, certain protists.
No.
Yeah, so they still have to eat other organisms to get food, so they are the other food.
Would they eat?
They're
like,
heterotrophs.
They would eat the little tiny guy, wouldn't they though?
They might. So this process in which living organisms use the sun's energy to make glucose, we call that process photosynthesis. Photo meaning light, synthesis meaning to build molecules, large molecules. Heterotroph, hetero, that prefix means other. Troph means food. So these are organisms that need to obtain energy by eating other organisms. We are all heterotrophs. All animals are heterotrophs. In order to stay alive, we need a constant source of energy. We need to eat. Kyle?
So, you're a vegan, a vegetarian?
Vegetarian.
Okay, but if plants are living things, aren't technically you still killing them?
Yeah. That's not what a vegetarian means.
You don't eat meat.
Yeah, but it's still a plant, it's still alive. That's plantus.
So, yes.
That's racist plantus.
Auto means self.
Fred? Wait.
All living things grow and develop. So those two words mean slightly different things. So growth is an increase in size over time. Here you have a seed germinating and growing into a small plant. Development is when a species sort of changes in its appearance as well. So this tadpole develops into a frog. All living things maintain homeostasis. Is this a word you've heard?
Yes.
I've heard of
Yes, I do know what it means.
So this is an important word to know now and going forward. Homeostasis really means maintaining sort of balanced conditions, maintaining the proper internal environment. For example, if our body temperature rises above normal, our body responds by helping to cool it down. What process does it use? See it? Sweating. And as sweat evaporates from our skin, it cools our body down. If our body temperature drops and it becomes too cold, our body responds by shivering. That warms our body up. So that's an example of us maintaining homeostasis. We have to have the proper body temperature to stay alive, and our body will make adjustments to keep it at the proper level. So our body maintains homeostasis by relying on a process called stimulus and response. The stimulus is some information coming into the nervous system, a change in the environment. For example, when our body temperature was dropping, that was a stimulus. And our response is how our body reacts to that change. And then, like you guys just told me, that might be sweating or shivering. So stimulus and response, we utilize our nervous and endocrine system to do that. But even simple organisms respond to changes in their environment, whether that's swimming towards light, growing towards light, avoiding certain chemicals that are in the water. All living things respond to various stimuli in their environment. So as we said, body temperature drops, that's the stimulus. What's the reaction?
Shiver.
Shiver. Body temperature increasing, sweating. How about, let's say last period at lunch, you ate 3 bags of gummies, ice cream sandwich, and a bag of Skittles. There's now sugar is rushing into your bloodstream. Does anybody know how our bodies responds to that stimulus of excess sugar in our blood? Colin?
Does your heart rate increase?
No, there's something else.
It's kind of like an adrenaline rush.
It's not really. Your body, if you know anyone that their body is unable to control its blood sugar level on their own.
Yes.
So, Ella, what were you gonna say? Yes, our body's response is to release insulin. Insulin is a hormone that helps lower the level of sugar that's in our blood. Our body monitors our blood sugar level and makes adjustments to that stimulus.
Like when you say it like releases insulin, is it like in one spot or is it like floating around the bloodstream and then like when there's too much and then it goes after?
So we have special cells in our pancreas called islets of Langerhans, and our pancreas
That sounds sick.
is monitoring our blood sugar. And when it notices our blood sugar rising, it turns on these cells. They start creating insulin, which goes into our blood, circulates around our bloodstream. When it gets to our liver, it signals our liver saying, basically, hey, there's too much sugar in our blood, that's dangerous. You need to take some in and remove it from the blood. Our liver does that, and our blood sugar level drops back down, our insulin turns off. And the opposite also happens. If your blood sugar level drops too low, the pancreas produces glucagon, which goes throughout your bloodstream, goes to your liver, tells your liver, hey, blood sugar level's too low, we need some, and your liver releases sugar until it gets to the proper level. So it has this balance of keeping conditions.
The human body is a unit.
If a virus enters our body, we respond by getting a fever to help us destroy that virus. It's part of our body's immune response.
that when you get like the chills too, like when you're too hot?
When you exercise, okay, you go and you have to run sprints at basketball practice today. Your body's using up oxygen. How does it respond?
Heavy breathing?
Okay, you breathe harder. What about if there's a loud noise? If that's a stimulus,
Well, like this one is a no.
how does our body respond to that? Jump.
I got more of a scare.
If you get really scared, your heart starts to race. Your stomach feels weird. You become jittery. All of those are responses to being scared. All right.
My heart rate.
All living organisms have a universal genetic code, whether it's you or a bacteria or a tree. The genetic code is the same for all living organisms. It's a code stored in DNA molecules within our cells. The genetic code is made of a series of bases, G's, T's, C's, and A's, that makes you who you are. All living things have that same code. And that code is what gets passed on from one generation to the next.
What does DNA stand for?
Deoxyribonucleic acid.
That should have been Stevie.
Deoxyribonucleic acid. And our genetic code, DNA, is made of a series of letters, made of 4 chemicals, T, A, G, and C. And the order that those letters come in for you is different from anybody else. And that's why you're different from the instruction about how to build us, how our bodies work, our appearance, all of those factors are spelled out within our DNA. Our DNA has the code to build us.
Whoa.
Yes?
In the letters, like in the bottom right of the box, and it looks like a pattern. I see like.
Yeah, sometimes there's patterns. C, G, G, A. Yep, there's patterns.
Oh yeah, like in the bottom one it says GGA, GGA, GGA.
Yeah, there are patterns to that DNA. Each 3 letters is a code for, well, we don't need to get into all that. All living things also are capable of reproducing. In order to continue a species, obviously, the species needs to be able to reproduce, to create new organisms. And so if we're thinking about living organisms, all living organisms have the capability of reproduction. Otherwise, the species would soon become extinct. And as we talk about living things, there's 2 sort of methods of reproduction that different types of living things might utilize for reproduction: sexual and asexual reproduction. We'll talk about both. We'll get into lots of details. We have a whole section of a unit about human reproduction, so you have that to look forward to. So in sexual reproduction, many types of organisms, such as humans, all animals, even plants, even certain protists and fungi, reproduce sexually. In sexual reproduction, you have 2 parents combining their genetic material to form the offspring. And in sexual reproduction, the offspring that are produced, they're not identical to either parent. They have some mixture of traits from each parent. And so sexual reproduction produces variation for the species. The other type of reproduction that some organisms use, such as bacteria, protists, plants, is asexual reproduction. In asexual reproduction, rather than two different individuals combining genetic material, just a single parent basically makes a copy of itself.
Like a plant. Is it like when a plant like loses a seed and then that seed
No,
sprouts?
seeds are produced via sexual reproduction. Plants reproduce sexually. I hate to break the news to you. Plants reproduce sexually.
How do you think we get water vegetables?
Plants have Alright, so we won't get into all the details now,
question.
but plants have reproductive organs. In fact, if over the holidays you buy for a relative a nice beautiful bouquet of flowers, what you're really presenting to them are the reproductive organs of a plant. That's what flowers are. Flowers are male and female reproductive organs.
Wait, that's your flower? I just ruined flowers.
That's what flowers are.
Sorry
Sorry to break this.
Bro, I'm
And like those big cup ones.
Alright, so if we look at this is an example of asexual reproduction, where you have just a simple, this is an amoeba, and when amoeba reproduce, basically they just make a copy of their genetic material and then just sort of split in half, and so reproduction is taking place. We had one amoeba, we ended up with two different amoebas, but they are identical to each other. Okay, the genetic material in this amoeba is exactly the same as the genetic material in these two amoeba. Versus in sexual reproduction, the offspring will get some combination of traits from each of the parents. Ali?
Okay, so even the
It is
last unit, when what's called, you had an isotope and then a daughter isotope. Why is it called a daughter isotope? And this one's called a daughter cell.
I don't know.
Why not a son?
When cells reproduce, they're called daughter cells, daughter isotopes. I don't know.
Because girls are just better.
Yeah.
That's like,
Yo,
I
Here-
get my point. Like Taco Bell.
All right,
Taco Bell
Colin,
can't
Colin,
start
not now.
with the same parents.
This is
That's
a
a good point.
Colin. Be quiet. This is another. We'll look at both of these. We're going to look at amoeba later on in a unit. This is called a hydra. It's a type of cnidarian. It's related to jellyfish, and they reproduce asexually as well. But instead of like the whole organism splitting, a new organism starts just growing out of the side of it. Eventually, it breaks off, floats away, and becomes its own living thing, and it's reproduced asexually. Yeah, Sean. All right, shh. Lots of plants. So plants we were just talking about, Ali, can reproduce sexually by pollen fertilizing the ovule, forming a seed. Or they also, many plants reproduce asexually, where like if I took a leaf, I actually did this today. So we had a plant at home, and I took a leaf off of it. I brought it over here, put it in this water, and the stem of this plant may begin growing roots, and I could plant it, and it'll grow into a new plant. But this will be genetically identical to my plant at home that I took it from, because there's no sharing of genetic material here. If you have pollen, pollen is the male reproductive cell of a plant. Pollen floating through air lands on the female reproductive parts of a plant, it fertilizes it, and then it grows into a seed, and that's how plants reproduce.
That would be
What's that? Yeah. All right, last slide here today. So we're going to talk a lot about evolution over the next few days. But all living organisms have evolved over time, okay, and have adapted to their ecosystem. So evolution is when a population changes over time. Now, important factor to know, an individual does not evolve and does not adapt to new conditions. Okay? So if an organism is born, the characteristics it's born with, the genes and DNA it's born with, that doesn't change. It's going to have that forever. It can't adapt to have some new characteristic. But if you're thinking about an entire population over a period of time, new traits, new characteristics can come about in that population through the process of evolution and natural selection. We'll talk a lot more about that in the next couple days. So when we talk about an organism, let's say this beaver, for example, it has several adaptations. This is a word you'll have to understand, that allow it to be successful. What are some adaptations that a beaver has? Tyler?
Big teeth for solid wood.
Yeah, it cuts down trees, uses it to build a dam. It has teeth that grow continually because they're constantly worn down. That's an adaptation that the species has developed over time that allows it to be successful in its environment. Sean, what else?
It lays eggs.
It does not.
That's a platypus.
Oh, it's a platypus.
Oh my god.
That looks like a platypus.
Why does it look like a platypus?
Bro, chicken tender.
So this is not. This is so eventually, so eventually we'll talk about mammals. The platypus is a monotreme. It is a type of mammal, but it's an egg-laying mammal. This is a placental mammal, and so it doesn't lay eggs, gives birth to live young. So adaptations are traits that help an organism to survive, allow it to be successful. These are traits that come about through natural selection. So we can analyze and look at any organism and determine what adaptations it has. So if we look at the picture on the next slide, obviously this is a made-up creature. So if you look at its characteristics, what is a characteristic you see, and tell me what that might be an adaptation for. You see it?
It has a
Hard shell. What might that be helpful for?
if something falls on its back.
Okay, it's protective. Yes. How about another characteristic that you might see? Another adaptation, Drew?
Wings.
Wings. What might that be an adaptation for?
You can fly.
But how is that helpful?
You can go.
You can skirt.
I'm
Mobility? No.
sorry, Zinette.
You can fly away from like its enemy.
Getting away from predators. Colin?
He has horns, maybe like scare off other, like the biggest horn wins
All right.
the contest.
So it could be horns for attracting mates, we could say. There's lots of different things we might say.
Are we supposed to write them?
You can write some down, sure. Why not?
Yeah, I don't want to go for the spiny tail because I'm like that he's gonna hit me with it.
Now we have one sort of strange category that scientists still don't really know how to classify them. And these are viruses. So there is sort of debate about should viruses be classified as living organisms. So viruses are sort of in between. So they're not made of cells. So that seems to go against what we just talked about. Okay? But they do have other characteristics. They can reproduce, but when can a virus reproduce? Only when it takes over another cell. So on its own, okay, the influenza virus that causes a flu, it can't reproduce on its own. It has to attach to a cell, invade it, inject its DNA into the cell, take it over, and then the cell actually makes more of the virus. And then it kills the cell, breaks open, and now it spreads more virus around. And those viruses take over other cells. So viruses are sort of in this strange territory. They have many of the characteristics of living things, but they don't have all of them. They're not independent. They can't live without a host organism. They're not made of cells. They're interesting to study. These are the shape of some viruses. This is the HIV virus that causes AIDS. This is a hepatitis virus.
What is that called? Hepatitis?
Hepatitis. This causes Ebola.
Oh,
I've seen
Adenovirus
I recognize-
causes respiratory infections. Influenza causes a flu. This is a bacterial phage. Looks like an alien.
Okay,
Yeah,
no,
that
that
scares
scares me. That was crazy.
What is that moving that not in the
guys are big
The cat and the guy.
No, and there's
Well,
like
there's
a
actually
giant
millions
song
there.
like, family is good.
More things on your body. There are
Everything is awesome?
on this earth.
No,
Lego movie?